All right. Well. Hello, friends. Let's see. Let me get a chat window here. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hello. Thank you for waiting. I have a little bit of a struggle with setting up a second monitor today, but we should be good to go. So, hello everybody, nice to have you here. Welcome back to SerenityOS office hours. And we are just going to continue with the usual format where, we take questions and dive into whatever you want to look at, whatever you want to talk about. Any technical questions about SerenityOS are welcome, and we'll just take it from there. So last time we looked at a whole bunch of things, and we had a couple of questions that kept repeating, so we do have an FAQ. I now also put a link to it down here on the screen so that everybody can see it, and I've also added a couple of things to it since last time. Because as much as I love talking about the system, it is nice if we can try to stick to, interesting questions, new questions as much as possible. But obviously we will have to revisit some topics. So let's see. Hello, welcome everybody. Glad to have you all here. So let's see. German WTB says, could you please briefly explain threading background actions, how their memory management is handled, and their relation to the event loop? Yes, absolutely. So the thread background action is a convenience class that allows you to run a task on a background thread, and you don't have to manage the background thread. It just creates it for you. And it's a very simplified interface, really. And maybe it's easier to just demonstrate how to use it instead of me showing you what the class looks like. So let's see. Let's just make a foo.cpp so we have it. And then we can look at that. So background action. And I'm going to do this before somebody complains. There we go. No? All right, let's see. Let me put the chat so it's always on top. Right, so background action, I don't know why this thing doesn't go away here. So background action, the way you use it is you create a threading background action. And you have to, every background action produces a result. Yes, thank you, James Puglia. I did mean to put it in utilities and I screwed it up again. There we go. Thank you very much, James. So background actions, they run a task on a background thread and then produce a result. So you have to tell it what kind of result it's going to be producing. So say that we want to produce an int, for example, then we create a background action that produces an int. And then it has two inputs, and it is two lambdas. So the first lambda is the sort of the worker task, and this lambda will execute on a background thread to produce the result. And then the second lambda is the sort of the completion handler. When the background thread is finished producing the result, it will call the completion handler on the main thread, passing it the result. So you get it like this. And then I think the background action is an argument to this guy right here, to the first lambda. So here you would have to return some sort of int. Say that you return 100. And then when this task finishes in the background, it will call this guy here on the main thread. And this has no relation to the event loop whatsoever, other than the execution of the completion handler. So The completion handler is scheduled to run on the main thread via a deferred invocation event that is executed by the main thread event loop. So I can show you how that works as well. So if we dig into, this is by the way how to use it basically, but imagine that you did like a lot of hard work to return something, 100. So you can do very difficult stuff here and it will run on a background thread. And if you spawn multiple background actions like this, they will execute serially. So it keeps them in a queue and it will just pop the next thing from the queue and run it. So you don't have to worry about ordering, like they always run in the order you schedule them. And if we look at how background action does this, we can see that when you construct a background action here, it calls enqueue work, which sort of pushes it onto the queue that the background thread reads from. And if we have a completion handler, it posts an event to the main thread event loop. And we have this thing called a deferred invocation event, which basically just bundles up a callback into an event and then throws it on the main thread event loop. And when the main thread is finished with all the events that it already had queued up, it will just call this callback. It is super duper handy, very intuitive once you get used to it. And then the lifetime of the background action is that basically once the completion handler has been executed, either via the deferred invocation, or if there was no completion handler, in either case, the background action sort of removes itself from its own parent, and that's how it dies. It goes away. And that's sort of I feel like that sort of explains how background action works and what it does. And we use it in the system to do stuff like generating thumbnails in the file manager. So if we look at this thing again with the with the window size, I'm not going to touch it. All right, so if we go to res icons 32 by 32, for example, well, this was very fast now, but all of these icons were generated by background actions in the background thread. They just notify the GUI on the main thread when it's time to update. Super chat from GPS saying, thanks for all you do. Oh, wow. Thank you for the super chat, GPS. I'm glad you appreciate what I do. And I really appreciate the super chat. Thank you. Let's see. Matthias says, hi Andreas, there seem to be many utility classes that are extremely useful, but you have to know that they exist. For example, a lapse timer. How do people learn about these classes? Just experience? Yeah, essentially the way people learn about it is experience and exposure. And since the system is written in such a way that all the libraries, all the applications, everything uses the same utility classes, then what tends to happen is that when you've been in the system for a while, if you hack on a couple of different things, then you get exposed to all the classes pretty quickly, with the exception of some more rare utilities. But the basic stuff like a lapse timer, you'll come across it pretty soon. And I think that's really, really nice. Whereas in many other systems, you would have like all these different applications implementing their own variants of the utilities, so it would be harder to learn about them. But here, because they're used everywhere, it's impossible not to run into them. So that's sort of how it works. That's not to say that documenting them would be a bad idea. I think that would be a great idea, making like a little, like a little index or something of utility classes. That seems like could be cool. Let's see, Write or Hitchhike says, how does something in the event loop receive a notification? Just a select syscall, or is there more nuance to it? It's essentially the select syscall. So I'll show you how the event loop is implemented. So the core event loop class has, where is it? Wait for event? Yes. So wait for event is the sort of the main workhorse function of the libcore event loop. And most of it is spent setting up the parameters to the select syscall. like adding all of the file descriptors and stuff that we're interested in. We get file descriptors from a couple of sources. So we have a wake pipe, which we use to communicate with other threads. So if another thread wants to wake up this event loop, they can write into a pipe. And if we reach something from that pipe, then we wake up the event loop because of that. It's called a wake pipe. And then we also have this thing called notifiers, which you can register to get notified when an arbitrary file descriptor has become readable or writable. So we add those file descriptors, and then we set up the timeout based on the next timer that is about to expire, so that we'd never go to sleep for longer than that. And then eventually we call select. So that's sort of how it works. That's how we set it up, all the parameters to select, and then the rest of the function is looking through all of the stuff that select returns so that we can figure out, okay, so what has changed? What do we need to react to? And there are a couple of drawbacks to using select. The classic problem is, of course, that you're limited to it has a hard limit of the number of file descriptors that you can use because the data structure is statically sized. So you could use poll instead of select to get around that. Some systems have a more like event based mechanisms, like these event queue stuff the BSD systems have. Many interesting solutions to this problem, but we use select at the moment, but we are by no means married to the solution. It was just how we wrote it. So let's see. LaneShot CS with a super chat. Thank you, LaneShot. Ever used OpenVMS? They are porting to x86 now. Yes, I have used OpenVMS a long time ago. It was maybe 15 years ago or something. I had there was an OpenVMS enthusiast in Germany who was giving out free shell accounts. Man, what was his name? Bernd Ullmann, I think. Is that the guy? Yeah, that's the guy. Vaxman, right, vaxman.de. I don't know if he's giving out accounts anymore, but back in the day he was, and I emailed with him back and forth and got an account on his Vax cluster and played around with it quite a bit. I never had my own VMS installation, but I was doodling around and this German one, and it was a lot of fun. I remember just looking around, being kind of perplexed by the strangeness of it all. It was like its own little world, but it made quite an impression on me. And fun fact about Serenity is that we have this peculiar way of naming our syscalls with a sysdollar, and that comes from OpenVMS, because that's sort of a naming scheme that they use to separate category from thing in some of their things. So let's see. Nerd binary number says, any opinions on scripting languages? And scripting as in meant to be embedded in a host app a la Lua or Chai script, not just interpreted. Any plans to implement your own other than JS? Well, I don't have any plans to implement anything other than JavaScript. I think JavaScript is a good scripting language to have, and it's very capable, very flexible. I don't think we need another one, but I'm also not married to that idea. Like maybe something, if something good comes up that seems reasonable, then we could look into that. But I like the idea of leveraging the investment that we are making in JavaScript, because we're putting all this time and effort into making our JavaScript implementation good. I think it's good to take advantage of that. Let's see. Harrison says, what is your favorite C++ 20 feature? I don't know. I'm still hyped about modules, even though we don't have them yet. I guess I'm hyped about seeing what it's going to turn into. I don't know. I don't get super excited about standards. I get more excited when the features become available in the compilers that I use. So it's hard to say at this moment. And we're so deep into already using random little C++20 things that I'm starting to lose track of what's C++20 and what's not. Jack says, hearing about what you and Linus are doing with libjs inspired me to make my own programming language. Love the channel. That's awesome. And I also want to call out that there's a lot more people than just me and Linus working on libjs. It's a very active project, and it has almost a life of its own. So there's a whole bunch of people working on it nowadays. And I'm glad that it inspired you to make your own language. Let's see, Big Knife Wrangler says, any Git implementation for whatever Serenity's code text editor would be? Any plans on an IDE? Well, I would encourage you to try out the system. We do have an IDE. It's called Hack Studio. And it actually, if you have the Git port installed, then it will detect that and provide some Git integration features like diffing and staging commits, making commits, stuff like that. And it does rely on the third-party Git port, so nobody has written a Git port for the system. Hack Studio is in kind of an interesting place in that it's the only thing we have that detects the presence of ports and adds functionality dynamically if ports are present. The other ports being like make and GCC and stuff like that. Let's see. Oh, I have to I have to cough. All right, hopefully that worked out with the mute. Yes, I'm using Ubuntu Mate. That's in the FAQ. If you have questions, a lot of them are answered in the FAQ. It's linked at the top of the chat in a pinned comment. It's also at the bottom left of the screen. Let's see, Randomly Awesome says, hello Andreas, are there any alternative computing architectures or instruction sets that you would have preferred to be ubiquitous in an ideal world, or is x86 your favorite? I'm a big fan of x86. I always have been. I guess I grew up with DOS machines, Windows machines, so it was all I knew. And I definitely recognize that there are shortcomings, but it has a special place in my heart. And I spent a lot of time building emulators for these instruction sets as well. But at the same time, I'm not married to x86. I'm happy to learn something new if that becomes the norm. At the moment, desktop machines are de facto x86, so that's what we use. But, well, we'll see what happens. Right or Hitchhike says, what are your opinions on having a mirror repo for ACK to use it in programs other than Serenity? I really like ACK and I want to use it in my project. However, that requires cloning the entire repo. Yes, I recommend cloning the entire repo. We are not going to split the repo into multiple repos. That's not what we do. Calculated Risk Taker says, Andreas, what happens to the BIOS after the operating system starts booting? Do we completely discard BIOS code from the memory? How does the handover from BIOS to operating system takes place? So it depends on many things. In our case, we normally use a bootloader. So we are booted by something like Grub. Or during normal development work, I just use QEMU, and QEMU supports the multi-boot protocol, so the handover happens there. But normally what happens with BIOS code is that the BIOS code is like read-only memory that exists somewhere in the physical memory space. So once you have booted, you don't really need that code anymore unless you want to call something like mode setting APIs in the graphics BIOS or stuff like that. But if you don't need it, then you can just map something else at those addresses, and the BIOS will still be there in physical memory, and you can always remap it later if you want to. But normally operating systems, like modern operating systems, don't really need to call the BIOS, so they're free to reuse that memory space or something else. I mean, that virtual memory space. Let's see. Rohan says, hello Andreas, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to know if you do the designs, or is there a design system for Serenity? If we do the designs, I'm not sure what that means. But if you're talking about like designing icons and graphics and stuff, a bunch of people have contributed icons and graphics and design work. I've done a lot of it myself. I made the original fonts and icons and everything, but then other people have added more fonts, more icons and stuff. There's no like explicit design system, and as much as like a interface guidelines or something like that. We sort of just go by feel, but obviously it's heavily influenced by late 90s, early 2000s operating systems. So Mateus with the super chat saying, you and your work are an inspiration for me. Thanks. Thank you, Mateus, for the super chat. That's awesome. I still don't know what our $sign means, but thank you regardless. Let's see. Itamar saying, can you talk about the state of the JavaScript bytecode VM? Of course. So the bytecode VM, which I started working on last month, it got to a point where it's able to run small, simple programs, and it's also part of our libjs automated testing system. So if you go to the test 262 results page here, you can see this is the main runner, but also if we scroll down, we can see that we're also running them with the bytecode interpreter. And it's mostly regression testing at this point. The state of the interpreter is that it needs a lot more work, needs a lot more bytecode instructions. I stopped or paused working on it because I realized that there are so many correctness issues with the engine that it was very difficult to make progress on bytecode before we had fixed all the correctness issues. And Linus and Idan and all the folks working on libjs have done a great job improving the correctness. There are still a couple of things, especially with regards to scopes and variables, that I would like to see fixed before we resume work on the bytecode interpreter. But all the basic architecture, I think, is generally sane. It just seemed to me like investing time in building this thing out before the rest of the runtime was working correctly would be kind of a mismanaged effort. Let's see. Phil says, since you want this to be your daily OS, any plans on a way to tackle streaming like you do via OBS? So I don't have an explicit plan for how to solve that, but it is a problem that I'll have to solve. So I don't know. Just off the top of my head, I imagine that the first approach we would take is maybe getting like basic webcam functionality in the system so that I could stream a virtualized Serenity, but the webcam would be running inside Serenity instead of outside of it, and then sort of take these steps one thing at a time. But I don't know. There are a lot of interesting problems in streaming, like video encoding and a lot of protocols and stuff. But I think if we, like anything big and complex, like if you can just subdivide it into smaller problems, and you just keep chopping things and dividing, eventually the pieces become so small that you can actually make progress and solve them. And then you just got to do that enough times. Let's see. James says, even though you don't want to split ACK and other libraries into their own repos, I do hope liblogum is split at some point, as it is quite hefty to link against that when it's usually not necessary. Yes, I agree with that. And actually, I think Linus agrees with that as well. he made an issue about that just the other day, where he was requesting that we split it into more than just one library. Because like now, when you want to build libjs for your host, you also have to build all of these things, which you may not care about. Certainly for testing JavaScript changes only, this is not relevant stuff. So I think that would be a good thing. Let's see. Kyle says, has there been any work on a spec compliant CSS parser? Yes, absolutely. There is work ongoing right now. Just before I went live here, I was in the browser channel on our Discord. Shout outs to the Discord. There's at least 2 people working on spec compliant CSS parsing right now, making really good progress. And I think it's looking very good. The latest thing they were talking about was the opacity property. Troy says, will Serenity run at all on ARM? If somebody ports it to ARM, it will totally run on ARM. Peter says, hi Andreas, I really like your videos and I found you through Live Overflow. I understand 5% of what you're saying, but I still like it. Thank you. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that you like it, even though only 5% goes through. I can assure you that if you stick around, we will increase that number over time. Let's see. Simonas says, hello, maybe silly question, but where is int main? So that's not a silly question, but the answer is that there are very, very many int mains. If you search for int main in this project, you will find 100 plus matches because the system is built up of many, many, many smaller things. So perhaps what you are interested in is where is sort of the main function of the kernel. Oh, Fred says our $ is Brazilian real. Yeah. That's. I think I looked it up last stream and I already forgot it. Yeah. So the place where you start, which is sort of equivalent to main in the kernel, is init, and this is this function right here is sort of where we enter into the C++ kernel after all of the bootloader and pre-kernel stuff has executed. This is where things start, and we start to try to talk to the hardware and figure out, like, okay, so what kind of machine is this, and what's in here, what can we use? But then there are many, many, many other int mains, like in Windows Server and in the shell terminals and all kinds of stuff. Lucas says, do you have a degree? I do not have a degree. I didn't finish high school either, and I have a video about that somewhere on my channel. Engineering jobs without a degree cling. Yeah, I have this video here, how I got engineering jobs at Apple and Nokia with no degree, where I talk more in detail about that if you're interested. Let's see. Zero says, how is the app for viewing partitions used space called? Where can we find the code for it? So I think you're probably referring to Space Analyzer, which we have. And I did the thing with the size again, just a second. So Space Analyzer is a Serenity program that scans the entire file system and then renders it in this thing, which is called a tree map. So tree map, and it's a very nifty type of chart that visualizes the size of things, right? And this is all implemented in the Space Analyzer directory. Oops, that's not what I wanted to open. I wanted to open that. So Space Analyzer, it's in Userland Applications, Space Analyzer. The tree map rendering is all in the tree map widget class. So this guy right here. And you can read all the code. Let's see. Rodrigo says, Mr. Kling has a huge audience in Brazil. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's awesome. I've been to Brazil and it was a bit warm for me, but it was nice, and the food was very nice, but really warm. Let's see. A calculated risk taker says, do we have something similar to TCP View of sysinternal in Serenity? I'm not familiar with that. TCP View, sysinternals. What is that? Let's get a screenshot. So this looks a bit like netstat, right? So unless you're talking about looking at TCP, like protocol level packets and stuff, we do have netstat. So we have netstat command, which shows you all of the live sockets on the system. And we also have a socket view. If you open System Monitor and look at the network tab, you can see here, I think these are TCP and these are UDP, but there's no indication that that's the case, which, now that I look at this, makes me wonder why doesn't it say like TCP and UDP or something? That's weird. But yeah, that's what this is. So you can see the state of the socket. So like if they're connected, I guess if we connect to somewhere, you would be able to see some TCP sockets. Yeah, so connecting to GitHub, you can see various TCP connections happening in the alt state. And we don't have anything like TCP dump, which would be a really cool thing to build. But we do have raw sockets. We don't have like promiscuous mode and that kind of stuff, but like all stuff that could be implemented. Let's see. Deep Majumdar says, "Hi Andreas, you are a true inspiration. I used to doubt my abilities to make something more complex than my usual projects, but now I have the courage." Good. You should have the courage. Like, I think people get afraid of complexity because there's a sort of a cultural meme among programmers almost that complexity is something that's reserved for big companies and you can't possibly build complicated software by yourself or in a small team, but you certainly can. It just takes a bit longer, and there's a lot of work that goes into it, but you can build anything. So I'm glad to hear that. Okay, German WTB says, for everyone wanting to get started on SerenityOS, I think SourceTrail is a perfect application. It is really surprising this app is not better known. Well, thank you for the super chat, German WTB. I've never heard of SourceTrail. Maybe I should know about that. So it's some kind of a source code exploration tool. Okay, well, I'll have to look into that later. Let's see. Saint Vict says, Sup Andreas, how's life? Life is good. Life is good. Summer is starting to wind down a little bit, so it's getting a little bit cooler, which is fantastic. The heat has been debilitating for me in the last couple of weeks. It's been very hard to do anything with the brain, so I keep waiting until nighttime before I can get productive. So it'll be good to have that season change. Isaac says, well, hello, friend. Well, hello, Isaac. Just passing by to say hi, just like last week. I hope you had a blast this week. You look great today. The chat looks great as well. Everybody looks great. Hell yeah. Dude, I love that comment. That is a good comment. You do all look great. And it is a great day. Thank you, Isaac, for bringing the positivity. Let's see, Mechanist105 says, I don't know much about operating system development, but in startup of the kernel, would it help to cache hardware information after first run to improve boot time? I don't think you would save that much by doing that, and you would increase the complexity of your kernel quite significantly because When you are just booting, you don't have access to a hard drive yet. So where do you store that information, right? And then also, what if you add hardware that is not in your cache? You still have to discover that it was added. So then you need some logic that checks for stuff that was added on outside of what you have cached. And since this is a relatively quick process, just like finding the hardware, at least in my opinion, is better to just do the full detection and not try to be smart. The exception to that would be if you have like, if you're Apple or Android or somebody like that, and you're building software for a specific set of hardware that you know that like the machine is either going to be this, or that, then it might make sense to cache all that information. Since it's not going to be changing under your feet anyway. Linus says, your OS looks very good and fun. Well, thank you. You look good and fun too. Arjob says, hi Andreas, I made it this time. It is really great to see the progress you have made. Wanted to wish you all the best and may you find what you set out for. Well, thank you. That's lovely sentiment. I'm glad you made it this time. Yoaz says, do you write everything from scratch in SerenityOS? For instance, the browser rendering engine. Yes, we do. Everything is written from scratch, and the browser rendering engine, okay, I screwed something up. The browser engine, I started, okay, wait, what have I done? Oh, the foo program. The browser engine, I started a long time ago, and I do have screenshots on SerenityOS.org. If you look at the Happy First Birthday post, you can scroll down, or I can just search for browser. I started on it in the first year here, somewhere around here. So this is like when there was only a libhtml. That was before it was called libweb. And I started adding a CSS support, and we've just been building on it from there. So it's all from scratch. That's what's really fun about this project. Like, we don't try to simplify things by picking ready-made pieces from elsewhere. We would rather like go through the process of learning how to build everything, just because it's fun. And people often ask about that. It's in the FAQ, and I mean, like, why don't you just use some existing browser engine, or why don't you just use this, or why don't you just use that? And the answer is always that because that's not fun. It's fun to build things ourselves and figure out how stuff works, and go through the pain and the process, and coming out enlightened on the other side. It's an amazing thing, and I'm really glad that so many people want to do this together with me. Okay, so Khaled says, how do you make sure you never get bored making SerenityOS? What if you get bored one day? Yeah, I mean, what if I do get bored one day? I think the system is too large for me to get bored, because I certainly get bored with individual components of the system. Like, I don't want to work on, say, like, file manager every day, right? Because that would get really boring. But the system is so large in scope that whatever, like, even if I'm bored of 20 things in the system, there's like 100 more things I could work on. So the sort of the diversity of sub-projects makes it impossible to get bored for a long time here. There's always something to do. And of course, that only works if you have a mindset that you're willing to work on any part of the system. And I always try to encourage other people to not get too locked into working on one specific component on the system, because it's been so good for me that I can pick up any part of the system and work on it and have a good time. And I really want for everybody to have that experience. But obviously, it doesn't fit everybody. Like, some people, they're very comfortable sticking to one area, but I still recommend to everybody to branch out and do many different things. Nanobyte says, "Hello Andreas, I just started my OS development channel and you are a real inspiration to me." Well, that's cool, Nanobyte. I don't know how to get to your channel, but I'm happy to hear that you're starting an OS development channel. I think there is definitely room for more operating system development content, and especially stuff that's like past the beginner stages, because there's so much beginner content, but the sort of the advanced and intermediate and advanced topics don't get a lot of coverage. And I think that's largely why people come to this channel so much, because I don't know, there's not much competition in this particular area in terms of content, right? And I would be really happy to see some competition. Leonardo says, "How does the kernel manage the processes and threads?" Okay, all right. So that's a really big topic, but essentially the process class, if we look in the process CPP, there is a giant list of processes. That is the global process list in the system. Every process, when created, is added to this list, and when it's deleted, we delete it from this list. So you can always iterate through this list of processes if you want to learn which processes exist in the system. And of course, you have to take the process lock before you do that. And the threads follow a similar structure. So in thread.cpp, we have a hash map, actually, of thread ID mapping to a thread pointer. So you can look up threads by thread ID. And these are like our global lists of processes and threads. And then the scheduler works on threads only. So processes are more of almost like a metadata thing, because a process can have many threads, but the scheduler doesn't care about processes. It only cares about threads. So when the scheduler runs, it just goes through the priority queues and looks at which threads are runnable. And do we have any high priority threads that are runnable? Then we run those. Any lower priority things that are runnable, then run those, and so on. It's a fairly simple setup, but I don't know specifically what you would like to know about. So, but I can say that we do follow a pretty standard like POSIX Unix model where you fork your process to get a new process, and you can exec to replace the executable image, and you can create new threads at will. Although we don't have a clone syscall that clones the thread like on Linux, but instead we have a create thread syscall that just creates a thread that starts execution at an arbitrary location. Let's see. Govinda says, "How are you maintaining process control block PCB, and how are processes scheduled? Does it use shortest job first or FIFO approach on single core?" So I'm not sure that all of these things apply here. We don't have any idea of how long a job is going to be. So it's a pretty simple priority-based round-robin scheduler. So it's round-robin, but with priority queues. I don't know what you mean by process control block. Like, do you mean, like, I guess you're talking about like the process object, which is our closest thing to that. So the process object in our kernel is just a C++ object that represents a process, and it has all the state, like what's your UID, your GID, your current working directory, stuff like that. Let's see, Austin says, "Do you have configuration instructions for CLion like you did a video on QCreator?" I don't have a video about it, but there is a documentation. C-line configuration. So you can, this is where you can learn how to set everything up for C-line if you want to use that. Let's see. James says, am I correct when I say the last required third-party piece of code for Serenity was the zlibpuff thing? So I don't know. I haven't checked. I think we got rid of all the third-party things. That was certainly one that we held on to for a long time. That and getopt and some other stuff. But we eventually replaced it. We have our own decompressing code now, thanks to I think Edan worked on that. Jean says, hi Andreas, awesome project and videos. This might be a dummy question, but since you are extensively using C++, do you plan on using modules in Serenity? Yeah, of course. If it becomes available and it works well, then we will try to make use of it for sure. The great thing about Serenity is that we are not bound to backwards compatibility at all with anything. So if something new becomes available to us in the language or in the compiler, we can always use it if it's useful. Help Me says, SerenityOS is great. I hope someday you will be able to put it on hardware with little trouble. Yeah, I hope so too. That would be cool. Let's see, what about Mr. Mamandon says, what about pen testing? Is someone doing this for Serenity? I once heard there was a bug which gave access to I/O instructions to a program. I mean, sure, yeah, there have been various security problems found, just like any software, we also have had security problems. We probably still do have security problems, and I welcome people to work on that. I haven't talked about it for a while now, but we do have a bug bounty program where I will, of course, personally pay anybody who finds an exploitable bug in one of these categories. We have had a fair number of people who found very interesting exploits and documented them. And I always encourage people to pen test the system and also to help out with improving the security of the system. I think one thing is that it's weird when you see people talking about security issues like that's an unusual thing. I've seen sometimes people saying I was interested in this or that system, but then I heard they had a security problem in the kernel. Every kernel ever has security problems. It's just a matter of if you find them or not. And I think I've really enjoyed looking for security problems in our kernel, and I found many myself. And I think it's really fun work for anybody to do if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know how to expand on that more. Let's see. German WTB says, what are your thoughts on maybe introducing a class for pixels instead of using int? For pixel, for distances, maybe, I don't know. In what context would that be useful? I mean, when it comes to stuff like that, like having a specialized math classes, it's good if you can show a demo of here's something that this makes much easier to understand, right? But I certainly agree with this issue here, that the high DPI system. So we do have high DPI mode in Serenity, and it does make pixel math pretty tricky sometimes because you have to consider the physical pixels versus the logical pixels. Anyway, Peter says, is there a video player in Serenity? Ooh, wait. Damn it. Sometimes I lose the track here. Is there a video player in Serenity? If so, how hard is it to implement this compared to other things like CSS rendering, etc.? There is no video player in the system yet, but Hunter is working on a VP9 codec. And I think eventually he will want to add a video player so we can look at VP9 files. I think how hard it is compared to anything else, like it's all just work. I often feel like if you think about things in terms of like how hard it is, it's almost like limiting, and you instead want to try to think in terms of how long it will take, because things are not necessarily harder or easier. They just take a certain amount of time, and then you eventually do them anyway. Let's see. Oh, hold up. There's a super chat right here. Benjamin Phelps with the monstrous $100 super chat. Thank you, Benjamin. Thanks, Andreas, he says. I don't even know what you're thanking me for, but I really appreciate the super chat. Man, that's awesome. Thank you. Let's see. Yuval says, for some reason, I can focus better after I drink tea. Yeah, I feel the same way. Kong Dang says, hi, could you explain a little bit about what's different between inheriting from RefCounted versus using some kind of shared putter? Right, so RefCounted is a template class that it's a convenience class in our library that you can use if you want to build something that has basic reference counting. What it does, it basically just expands to a simple class that has a reference count and ref and unref functions. And it just takes care of the incrementing, decrementing ref count and calling the destructor if needed. If you want, you don't have to use the RefCounted base class for your reference counting class in Serenity. It's just here because it's convenient, and if you don't need any special kind of reference counting, you can just inherit from this. So one thing to know about RefCounted is that the reference count is intrusive, so it ends up in your object. When you inherit from RefCounted, we just slap the ref count in there, so there's no separate control block or anything like that. But if you want to do anything custom with reference counting, as long as you provide the functions ref and unref, so ref like this and unref like this, then the ref putter and related smart pointer classes will work with your type because they only care that ref and unref are present. Let's see. Kenneth says, I was looking for a way to add a shortcut key for open save buttons in the file picker dialog, like Alt plus key. I ended up a path down to libgui action plus libgui shortcut. Am I on the right path? Ooh, that's a great question. So we currently don't support like automatic button shortcuts, but that's something that would be super awesome to implement. So what he's talking about is these buttons here, for example, in the file picker dialog. And if we could have something so that you press Alt-O to activate the open button, right? And it would be super sweet if you could just set the text of this button to &open, like this, like Kenneth says here, and it would automatically generate a shortcut for Alt plus O, like we already do for menus. So menus already work this way. Wait a minute, there was something weird here. Ooh, we have two separators in this menu. That's not good. I think it's because it's it's missing the always on top option for this window, because you can't put a modal always on top, I guess. And then we get two separators. Just awful. Literally unusable. We have to fix that. But yeah, so menus already have this thing that you can say &open, and it creates this O underlined automatic shortcut here. So if I press O, it activates that. So the way that we would implement that, I think essentially you want to create you could do it with an action, yeah, like automatically instantiating a window level action for that shortcut. That would work. It could also be nice if you didn't require an action, but you could say, like, you could only provide a shortcut and then register that shortcut with a callback to activate this widget. I'm not sure exactly, but if you look at Windows Server connection, the way that we find the action for a key event. So when we get a key event coming in, we call, let's see here. So Windows Server tells us key down in this window, right? Then what we do is we find the window and then we make a key event and then we check, is there an action that corresponds to this key event? Because if so, we'll activate the action before sending the key event anywhere. So I think you would want to, this is the point where you would want to interfere, right? So that you could find the shortcut for your widget. But maybe this would be separate because it's not really an action that you're activating, it's just a widget. So I'm not completely sure how this would look, but it feels like you could just allow registration. So you would tell the system, like, say that you have a button, and then you would say like button set shortcut, like mod control key O or whatever, I don't know. Like if you could do something like this, and this would do all the appropriate registrations so that there would be a lookup here that looks up the shortcut and a hash map, finds the button, and then activates it somehow. That would be sweet. But either way, I'm really happy that you're picking this up. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Jay Weiss says, are there any plans for localization in Serenity? No. Night Vision says, hi Andreas, what are some tips you could think of when using smart pointers to avoid memory problems? Well, the main tip is to use smart pointers whenever possible. We have in the Serenity repository, there is, I should probably make a better bookmark for this. We have a smart pointers document that describes our smart pointers that we have in Serenity. And I kind of feel like these are the three main types of smart pointer that everybody should know and should use. So we have a single owner smart pointer, multi-owner smart pointer, and a weak smart pointer. If you learn and incorporate those three types of smart pointer in your programs, they will be immensely improved when it comes to avoiding memory troubles. Matthias says, how do the smart pointers work? Is it an opt-in GC mechanism where the GC operation is cheaper than normal? So smart pointers work, well, it depends on which type it is, right? But none of them are garbage collecting smart pointers, at least not in our system. So we have the single owner smart pointer, which is the most basic form. The C++ standard library calls it unique putter, and that just keeps track of a pointed to object or pointee, and when the smart pointer goes out of scope, it just deletes the pointee. It's a bit more complicated once you have a shared ownership thing or multi-owner thing. We solve that with reference counting. So we have our refputter and non-null refputter, and they work by maintaining a counter, usually, that just says like how many people are currently pointing to this object. And when you create a new ref pointer that points to that object, you increment that number. And when you destroy a ref footer that pointed to that object, you decrement the number. And when that number goes to 0, you delete the pointee object. That's sort of basically how it works. So there's no garbage collection. It's just accounting for how many people are currently pointing to it. Let's see. Oh. Let's see. Do you have... man, I gotta learn how to pronounce Cyrillic names. I don't know what the... Is that Igor? Or... Let's learn it. This didn't help. Can I get... Igor! Okay. Yeah, I saw Igor somewhere. Igor. There we go. I gotta learn this Cyrillic alphabet. Igor says, do you have a list of performance bottleneck kernel code, and you have some ideas to upgrade in future to some data structures for better performance, like trees? I don't have a list of performance bottlenecks in the kernel, but I've been keenly aware of some of them, and I've been working on them one by one. So recently I wrote a new physical page allocator because the previous one had O of n complexity, and now it has O log n, I guess. And now the main badly performing algorithm in the kernel is kmalloc, the heap allocator. And I have a new design for that I keep working on for a day, and then realizing that I need to change the architecture, and then I do something else for a day, and then I get back to the kernel heap allocator. But I don't have a list of these things or anything. I think the best way to approach this, if anybody's interested in improving kernel performance, is to profile the kernel and get your own data. Instead of like me telling people like, hey, this thing should be this data structure. I like it better when people get the data for themselves, so that they know how to drive the work that way. Because if you go into performance work with anything other than data driving what you're doing, then it's very likely you are not spending your time optimally. Anyway, Nanobyte says, thanks for showing us that it's possible and showing us how to do it. Most projects get stuck in the early stages. I did too a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, that's super common that you get stuck in the early stages. I think something that really helped me a lot was like making my project public and inviting people to see it, because it just makes it impossible for me to walk away from it, right? Because I can't stop now. We've come this far. Let's see. Good Kirat says, Andreas, you haven't shared the link for wallpaper. Are you talking about this wallpaper? So I posted this wallpaper after the last stream. Was it you that asked for it? I posted it on Discord in the artwork channel. So if people are not on the Discord, we are on discord.gg/SerenityOS. And in the artwork channel somewhere you can find the wallpaper. Recently I posted it after the last week's thing. Let's see. Ahmed says, is there a chance to create a tutorial on creating GUI frameworks? I don't know. I don't think I would make a tutorial to create anything other than maybe create tutorials how to make apps in Serenity. Because I'm not really a tutorial maker guy. Let's see. Isaltino says, do you think to do some EPUB reader? So maybe we would do an EPUB reader. I mean, that sounds like a really cool thing to have. And if you have a web engine, you have a lot of what's needed already to do EPUB, right? And we do have a growing web engine, so it seems pretty possible that we could do Serenity EPUB reader sooner or later. But I don't personally have a plan to do it. I don't have a plan to make anything in particular. So Saintvit says, Andreas, I hope one day you will be hiring devs to work on Serenity. I would love to apply. Dude, I would so love to be able to hire people to work on this, but we're not quite there yet. I am just able to fund myself working on the system at the moment, but it would be just a dream if we could fund more people to do it. And I think everything is possible, right? Like, we just have to keep improving the system and pushing forward until until I don't know, until nothing. Like there's nothing that we're gonna stop at, right? So we just have to keep growing and keep accumulating support and interest. And I think eventually it will be possible to fund more people, but I realize that I'm also dreaming a little bit, so I don't want to commit too much to the dream. But I mean, it has worked out to the point where I can fund myself doing it, right? So nothing is impossible. Anyway, let's see. Covinus says, what are the pros and cons of ref counting versus garbage collection? Seems like ref counting is easier to reason about, but you incur a penalty on create delete. Right. Yeah, so the pros and cons. The pros of ref counting is that it's very predictable, and you never have to pause the world to do accounting, like marking all of your GC objects and stuff. But the drawback of ref counting is that you can have reference cycles. So if you have two reference counted objects that point to each other strongly, then they would just stay alive forever because nobody is going to kill the other guy first. And garbage collection elegantly solves that problem by detecting that while they point to each other, there's no outside thing pointing to them. So that is the drawback. And of course, you solve that by having one of them point weakly to the other and one point strongly. But it requires a bit of finesse and a keen awareness of the issue, because it's a very common problem in any system that uses ref counting, is that you find these ref cycles. Let's see. Sai Manish says, I miss commute talks. Yes, I miss them too a bit. And when it gets a bit cooler outside, I will be happy to get into the car every now and then. Mateus says, there's a huge amount of programming content for beginners, but most of them are not actually good. How can we find decent learning sources? So the thing is that you don't actually need that great content when you're a beginner. What you need is reasonably good content, and then you need to put in a lot of time just practicing. You can get great with shitty content. It doesn't really matter. You just need to write a lot of code, make a lot of programs, and keep doing it. I think it's sort of it's a trap almost to think that you're not making progress because you don't have the right content or good enough content to learn from, when the truth is that you just need to do more on your own, practice more. And as long as you have access to like a reference material for the language that you're working with, that's really all that you need. And I think I wouldn't worry so much about it. Like for beginners, there is enough content for beginners to become intermediate. And once you become intermediate and advanced, you will discover that that's where the real content drop-off happens, because there's like you say, like there's a lot of content for beginners, but once you get past the beginner stage, the number of people making content start to drop off dramatically, right? And that's where the real drought starts. Kaut says, how hard would it be to implement an alternative theme with modern aesthetics? I don't know. I don't care. I don't want that. Let's see. Lennon says, other than an operating system, do you have any good examples of systems programming low-level projects to work on that would help someone improve as a programmer? Yes, absolutely. I think browsers are really good. Emulators are really good. And these are things that I've spent a lot of time working on. And I learned all about systems programming from browsers and from emulators. But really, like anything large enough to have its own utilities tends to slide into systems programming eventually. So like if you go and look at something like OpenOffice or LibreOffice or whatever, I bet you that you will find a lot of things that are basically systems development in there as well. Let's see. Oh, Yuval says Linus is also funded. That is true. I do have to shout out Linus's GitHub sponsors. Let's see. How do we get there? Sponsors. Linus Go. Linus has recently gotten onto GitHub sponsors as well, and is seeking funding to help him work on Serenity more of his time. And that is something I think is super awesome. I'm really excited to see Linus on here. And I hope that he can build up a support base as well. That would be fantastic. And as I said earlier, like I would love to be able to pay people to work on this, but I would love it even more if people can find ways to support themselves, like Linus is starting to work on here, right? Like that is even cooler. But either way, we'll see. Let's see. Our job says, hello, Andreas. What do you think about implementing and following POSIX standard in a operating system? Being POSIX compliant will help importing, but can also kill creativity. I think POSIX is fine. It gets a lot of hate from armchair operating system experts who don't actually do much operating system stuff. And when it comes to killing creativity, I don't believe that doing things differently than Unix just so you can say, hey, this is different than Unix, I don't believe that has inherent value. And there's a lot of room to color outside the lines and still be POSIX compliant. If you look at, for example, like Mac OS versus Linux, both are essentially POSIX systems, although you could argue that there are POSIX compliance issues in both code bases. But they're vastly different systems, right? Like there's a lot of room to be different. POSIX is really just like a tiny surface area where userland programs interact with the kernel in a common interface. It doesn't hold things back as much as people believe, I think. Joseph says, are you ever daunted by the number of people contributing to Serenity now, or do you worry about losing purity, focus, consistency across the code base? Well, let's see how many people are working on it. I don't think I don't know if I feel daunted. We have 453 contributors. That's a large number of people for sure. If this had happened overnight, I would have been daunted for sure. But you all snuck up on me, so it's fine. You didn't catch me by surprise since you came one by one. It's okay. And do I worry about losing purity, focus, consistency? I mean, yes, it is something that I'm concerned about. So it's something I'm actively getting on people's asses about all the time. Whenever I see something that I think this doesn't look good, or this breaks the system concept in one way or another, then I just go and try to fix it right away, as much as possible. And of course, also discuss it with the people. But generally, people who work on Serenity have a really good idea of the thing I wanted to do with the system. And I think this YouTube channel has been the greatest tool ever for me to communicate to everybody what it is that I'm trying to do, because people can come here and they can see exactly what I'm trying to achieve and what I look like while I'm doing it. And I think because of that, we have something here that's not, I don't know if any other project where people working on it have this good of an idea of what the original author is trying to do, if that makes sense. Even in like corporate projects, it's hard because there's more than one person deciding what to do usually. And I don't know. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, it's something that I do worry about, and it's something that I'm actively focusing on keeping things on track. Andrew with the super chat saying, I don't know and I don't care. That's right. That is my official feeling about modern themes, modern looks. I definitely do not care for putting those type of things in the system. Let's see. Abhishek says, hey Andres, do you remember the first time you discovered some advanced topics like inter-process communication, network programming, kernels, etc.? I don't know that I remember the first time I discovered advanced topics. Well, it's probably, actually, yeah, I do kind of remember. I think it was when I started hacking on KDE for the first time. And I realized that this was like in 2004 or something like that. So I was like 19 years old. And looking into these C++ desktop programs in KDE, it was unlike anything I had worked on myself to that point. These were like large, complex programs that had many subsystems that were interacting and talking to each other, and I felt like everything I knew about programming until that point was very simple and little, and I realized that there's a much bigger world than what I was aware of to that point. And it made a big impression on me, and I still think about that sometimes. Just the way that KDE felt to me when I first got into it, that it was so complex but also so consistent, because KDE and Serenity, at least in terms of the desktop environment, they have a lot of similarities in that they're built in the same way, that you have everything in one big code base, right? At least that's how KDE was developed back then. I think maybe they've changed it now. Let's see. CDPC says SerenityOS for servers 2003 edition. Yeah, I don't know about that. Oh, and Abhishek also says, thank you for doing QA so often. Yeah, so I don't know. Like now we've been doing this every Friday for a couple of weeks in a row, and I think it's pretty good. I think we can definitely keep it going if it stays interesting. It really depends on if we can keep the topics fresh every time, and we can like give people value, right? Like I don't want to sit here and say the same things every week, but if we can talk about new things every week, then I think there's definitely room for this. So we'll see. Let's see. Jenan says, some programmers prefer Vim and other terminal-based editors over IDEs. What's your take on that? I use the CLion IDE because I like it a lot better than using Vim and terminal-based editors. I don't have a take on other people having other preferences. I don't think it matters what other people do. Let's see. Chris says, I see you like Qt. Why not use a Qt-based desktop? Well, I like programming with Qt. I like working on Qt, but I don't really like the Qt-based desktops that are available. So that's why I don't use one. Just Alexander says, hey dude, I really like your project. Well, thank you. I really like your comment. Hello, MW guy. So let's see. Did we miss any questions? Probably we did. Probably. I mean, I know that I missed a whole bunch of things. Mellowbricks said, I am new here, what's happening? Well, hello, Mellowbricks. This is the weekly SerenityOS office hours, where I just take random questions about SerenityOS every Friday, and people can come and ask technical questions about anything. And then we just talk about whatever people bring up. Let's see. Write or Hitchhike said fix it live. Oh, I wonder what that was about. Fix it live. Oh, dude, maybe that was about the always on top thing. That's true. We did have that stupid looking always on top thing. For the modal windows. Here, right, this guy. Yeah, I guess I should fix that, but I don't know. Okay, wait, hold on. We got questions here. Christopher says, did you ever consider writing something else than a Unix clone? No, but the idea that the system is a Unix clone is it's an extremely limited view of the system. The Unix clone part is like a couple of thousands of lines in the kernel and C library, and the rest is like unrelated to that. Let's see. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce this name. Krizovujic says, you can start having different topics and themes for the office hours to keep the questions fresh. Yeah, that's probably a good idea, actually. I think we should probably do something like that. And I've also been thinking of like having a queue of questions that people could submit to beforehand, so that we have a couple of topics to start with. Kyle says, perhaps a good idea would be to use the new and interesting commits of the week as a jumping off point. Well, it is interesting, but I would also like to focus on stuff that people want to know about. But yeah, it is actually a good idea to have as a backup. Night Vision says, how does Serenity know the time when it boots up? We queried the CMOS. So when we boot up, we read the CMOS registers. This is on the PC platform, at least. So we read the various CMOS registers that the real-time clock in the PC, that it keeps updating these, and we just fetch these out on boot. So I think these might be binary coded decimal, but they could also not be. It depends on a mode. So you have to convert them potentially, do a little bit of math, and then that's how you know the time. So most PCs have a battery-backed real-time clock that even when the PC is turned off, it still updates the clock. And we just read from the memory area where that stuff is stored. So WTB Random 1 says, did you choose the look and feel of Serenity based on nostalgia, or do you feel like early 2000 GUIs were better in some ways than what we have today? Yes, I absolutely feel that they were better. And it has nothing to do with nostalgia. I think nostalgia is a cheap thing that you can use to bait people, and that's not at all what we're trying to do here. Instead, Serenity is more about recognizing that a lot of great UI design language and UI design, really good UI design paradigm was already invented and I don't want to say perfected, but like brought to a really high level a long time ago, and then people kept changing it for reasons that I don't understand or agree with, and this is more about like going back to that really good design paradigm and then trying to iterate responsibly on it instead of iterating with motivations of like, oh, let's simplify this so that anyone can use it, or let's simplify this so that it would work on a touchscreen interface, or these kind of motivations that that drag away from from a professional computer environment or from a power user environment, and instead we can go back in time and then create our own timeline where we try to build something based on everything that we've learned since then, but not perverting it with what has happened to contemporary UI design. Let's see. Joseph says, is the cat in the background based on a real-life cat? And if so, what is its name? So the cat here, or cat dog, if you will, that's the official name is cat dog because the person who added it to the repo couldn't decide if it was a cat or a dog. I see a cat, some people see a dog. And I think it's not based on a real-life cat, but inspired by, perhaps, the guy who added it to the system, Mork, he said he has a cat named Moof, M-U-F, and I think it was inspired by Moof. Let's see. Engel says, at the moment, all the settings are split between different programs following the 90s philosophy, but wouldn't it be nice to have all system settings in one application? Yes, absolutely. That would be very nice. Jeff Slater says, love the stream. Can Serenity be built on ARM? Could be a good candidate for convergence on the PinePhone. There is no ARM port at the moment. A bunch of people have picked it up and put it down again, working on ARM. Eventually, probably somebody will do it, but we'll see. Rakia says, hello Andreas, not a Serenity question, but what software enables you to resize windows from anywhere instead of dragging by the edge? So I'm just using the stock Mate window manager, which allows me to do it with Alt right mouse button. So I just hold down Alt and click the right mouse button, and then I can drag things from any edge. It's the it's one of my favorite features in the world. Let's see. Vineet Kumar says, how tightly coupled is UI in SerenityOS? Extremely. How would you react to someone using a window manager like i3 or Awesome on it? Well, I can't stop people from doing what they would like to do with the system. I would probably think, wow, that doesn't look good. But ultimately, I don't try to control what people do with the system. I just try to control what the system looks like by default and what we present to the world as a base system. If somebody wants to go and pervert it with like things that are not a good visual fit because they can, then they're free to do that. Let's see, Yuval says, can look at line 39 at RTC CPP. Yeah, what was that? Line 39. It looks like there's an accidental new line between the while and the semicolon. I think that new line is put there by the Clang format. So when I run Clang format, whoop, then it puts the new line there. That's why it's there. Let's see. Yuval says, since this is off, oh no, wait, that's H saying, since this is office hours, where is the fika room and bullar? The fika room is in my kitchen, and I don't have any bullar at home at the moment, but that does sound pretty good. Maybe I should get some. Christopher says, how do you write your own GUI library? Well, there are a couple of different ways to approach it. The approach I took, which ended up becoming the Serenity GUI library, is described a little bit here in the Happy First Birthday page. So what I did was I wrote this program using SDL on Linux, and it just created a big frame buffer in a window. So this was running on Linux in a window. And then I would just create classes like window and button and label and checkbox and things like that, and then make sort of a window manager that managed the space inside of this frame buffer and drew all the pixels by setting the pixels one by one. Really like getting down to the very bottom of like turning on and off individual pixels with the specific colors, and that's at least that's the graphics part of it. And then the second part of a GUI library tends to be the event loop. So I just had a basic select based event loop that that you can still see in Serenity today. It's not exactly the same as it was originally, but it looked similar. So core event loop, wait for event. This is how the event loop essentially worked. And actually, if you are curious about how the original SDL version of libGUI worked in Serenity, you can go and do some Git archaeology, and because it was all part of the repository. So if you go back to the very beginning of history, which I will do here if it permits, when I imported the system here in the original commit, there was no widgets library yet, but then I added in this commit right here, start working on a widgets library. This was SDL based, so you can see here we have event loop SDL, frame buffer SDL, and that's how I started what eventually became the GUI library, and just iterating on that. Unexplored says, how do you feel about the recent trend in new terminologies, such as not using specific words? I'm not a fan of politics, and I don't appreciate ideological subversion of software projects. Mr. KCT says, can you talk about what you guys had to do to port Serenity to x86-64? So there was a whole bunch of stuff that went into that, and there was a whole bunch of stuff, and 99% of it was done by Gunnar, who decided at some point that he's just going to do it. And I don't want to misrepresent everything that he did, but essentially the main things were like getting a boot environment working so that we can go into long mode, because the boot system that we use the multi-boot protocol, as I mentioned earlier, where we get handover from either from Grub or from QEMU. And it's always in a 32-bit protected mode environment. So Gunnar had to write a little bit of bootstrap code that jumps to 64-bit long mode, and then from then it jumps into our 64-bit kernel. And then he had to add another layer to the page tables, because we were using, I guess it is a 4-level or 3-level page tables, and we had to go one level up with the page tables to run 64-bit. And then there were like a million places where we were truncating addresses, because the kernel would assume that addresses were 32-bit, and it would irresponsibly store them in 32-bit values. And then there was the dynamic loader, needed a bunch of work to load 64-bit dynamic libraries and perform 64-bit relocations and stuff like that. It was a whole lot of stuff, and Gunnar just powered through it. It was amazing effort, and very, very proud of him for seeing it through. Let's see. Lennon says, SDL is so much fun. It is a lot of fun, yeah. The thing I love about SDL is that it makes it so easy to just throw up a frame buffer on screen and then doodle around with it. Like, you can just set this pixel to this color. Once you have that primitive, you can really build anything, right? Like you can build a game or a desktop environment or a web browser or anything. As long as you can set pixel at this coordinate to this color, that's all you need. You can build a world from there. I love that about SDL. Panta says, why do GUIs use event loops? What are the trade-offs versus alternatives? I guess event-driven programming is just, it just maps very naturally to the way we think about GUIs. Because essentially, at least in the GUI paradigm that we're working with here, you essentially have a static image that just sits around waiting for the user to do something. And then the user does something, and then the GUI wants to find out about what the user did. And the way that we've all converged on representing that is by telling the GUI that, hey, this event happened, right? I'm not aware of any like pervasively successful model for making GUIs. I guess you could say that like web-based GUIs are in some ways a bit different, but even many web-based GUIs tend to be event-driven. Certainly the native interaction model of web content is event-driven. But I don't know, it would be interesting to learn about if there are some popular alternatives to event loops. I'm just not aware of any myself. Ricep says, not a question, but you really look like Tyrell Wellick from Mr. Robot. Right. Well, that's that Swedish DNA, you know. Joropo says, what about SMP? Is this something stable? Any reason why it's not default? So symmetric multiprocessing is not stable at the moment. It has stability problems. That's why it's not on by default. And it's also a bit slow at the moment. So if you run with SMP on, you can run with it on, and it eventually crashes because of some unresolved race conditions that we have to track down. But it's slow, and the slowness is the primary reason that it's not that I and many others probably haven't been messing with it too much, because it's just frustrating to try to do anything when it's so slow. But I mean, it's SMP like 64-bit and any other thing in the system. SMP is just another feature that we will eventually get to. And it just takes somebody picking it up and putting an active interest into it. Ryder Hitchhike says, I see you running GNOME. I see you running Mate. Well, yes, I guess old habits. Let's see. Vineet Kumar says, what was your reference when you wrote its kernel? Did you follow some textbooks or some links? Not really. I didn't really have a textbook or something like that. Bits and pieces I learned from the Intel x86 manual, and the OS Dev Wiki had a bunch of random little things that were really helpful. But most of the stuff was really easy to just do without reference. Since I come from a background in x86 emulation, then it was very natural to just implement a kernel. Hans Wurst says, oh snap, almost missed office hours again, long time no see. How do you feel about adding more languages like Lua to Serenity? Well, hello, Hans Wurst. I don't know how I feel about that. I think I like JavaScript, and I like the investment that we're making in having really strong JavaScript support. So I think it's better to focus on having one really strong language instead of multiple less strong ones. But I don't know. Vignesh says, no question, but I find your videos very relaxing when dealing with burnout / stress programming at work. I just put your videos on the side and I feel a bit calmer. Keep doing the good work, man. Well, thank you, Vignesh. I'm glad that I can have that effect on you. That's nice. It's nice. I never question why somebody would watch my videos. I just appreciate that people do. So thank you for doing that. Let's see. Joropo says, there are immediate mode GUIs, rebuilding the layout in each frame. It's slower than event mode, but useful for things like dynamic simulations, games, and such. Yeah, that's true. Immediate mode GUIs. I haven't messed with that much. That's something it seems really strange to me, but I guess a lot of things about games programming seem strange to me. Agaris says, how do you feel about containerization, Docker, etc.? Would you like something like this in Serenity? So I'm not a big fan of containerization. I feel like it kind of sanitizes the at least when it comes to Serenity stuff. People sometimes talk about like, oh, let's make it possible to just build and run Serenity in a container so that I don't have to install a build system, or I don't need to do this or that. And I always feel like it sanitizes and obfuscates the guts of what we're trying to do here. Like, but at the same time, as an isolation feature, I understand that it's a very useful feature, so I'm not necessarily against containers as a concept, but I do feel like they get applied a lot in weird ways by people who are effectively trying to trivialize something that is pleasantly complicated. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know. I have a weird aversion to this, I guess. I like to see the guts of the tool chain and stuff like that when we're working with Serenity. And I like for everybody else to see the guts. Like, when you're building an operating system, you want to see all the mess that goes into it. You don't... At least in my mind, you don't want to press a green button and like the operating system image comes out on the other side. Like, that's what you want if you are at the end of the development and you just want to like press a lot of CDs or something. But at the stage that we're at, like, we should all enjoy seeing the mess that goes into it. Anthony says, hey Andreas, just wanted to thank you for your amazing content. Last office hours I missed, but I really wanted to comment on the badge pattern. I love it, and I ended up making a C# version of it. That's awesome. That's really cool. I don't, like, to be clear, like, I don't claim to have invented the badge pattern. It's just, it's definitely something that exists with many names in other projects. But it's something that we use to great effect in Serenity, and I know that many people encounter it for the first time in Serenity. And I'm very happy that more people see the value of this excellent little thing. So that's cool that you made a C# version of it. Kyle says, I think JavaScript and C++ can work together side by side on Serenity. A bit like Python and C on Linux distros. Yeah, I guess so. I also think JavaScript and C++ are a great duo for the system. And there's a whole lot of things that need to get better about libjs. At the moment, we are kind of on a like on a correctness crusade with libjs, but correctness is it's almost like, I mean, I don't want to say that it's a finite problem because they keep changing the spec, but eventually we will run out of things to fix. At least if we keep going like this, right? So we started tracking libjs test 262 back at the start of June, and we were at 17,800 passing tests, and now we are at 24,900 passing tests. And we are passing tests faster than they are adding more tests. So eventually, we will have to do something other than just correctness for libjs, and it would be really nice when we can start looking at other ways to take advantage of the fact that we will have an excellent JavaScript engine in the system, right? Because already it powers things like the spreadsheet and the like the assistant calculator and the browser, of course. And it's interesting to think, like, what more could we do with a JavaScript interpreter? And you know, I keep mentioning this old thing that Linus did, but it's because it was a very interesting thing where he did these libjs bindings for some of our C++ libraries, and maybe some of the apps that we have would be just fine being JavaScript applications instead, like not like web JavaScript applications like Electron or something like that, but like libGUI JavaScript applications. It's an interesting thing to think about. So definitely something to revisit. It's funny that this was like over a year ago now. We've been doing this for a while. Peter says, thanks to you, I have read up on CMOS. Now I know 5.01%. The process is going on. Well, there you go. There you go. Yeah, because the way that I like to make content for this channel is really about just exposing people to a lot of stuff. As you've noticed, like, I don't try to explain every single thing that we get into. We just get into it, and I just assume that everybody is smart enough to go on Bing and Google for things there that they don't know about, and it seems to work really well. And I feel like what you just did, like, you heard about CMOS and you looked it up, and now you've learned a little bit. And I think if we all do that every day when we hear about something that we don't know so much about, then my goodness, we can learn many things. Jacob says, any thoughts on adding WebAssembly support to the JS engine? Probably a ways off, I admit, but just wondering if you've thought about it. My friend Jacob, we already have WASM. Ali implemented the WebAssembly spec, so we have libwasm, and we can run WebAssembly programs in the browser and standalone as well. Yoaz says, a more basic question, but what does SerenityOS have to do with smart pointers, reference counting, etc.? Aren't these more programming languages related things? Why do Serenity include this? Well, C++, the language, does not offer a built-in smart pointer primitive. The C++ standard library has some smart pointers, but we do not use the C++ standard library. And even if we did, I don't know that we would use those smart pointers. But we only use C++ the language. So we have to create our own facilities for reference counting, smart pointers, garbage collection, all kinds of things, memory allocation, everything. It's SerenityOS implements everything. So that's why we implement those things, because we implement everything. Hans Wurst says, so something cute quick-like for Serenity maybe. Yeah, maybe. Something like it. I think there's an intersection between RGML and JavaScript that's not exactly like Qt Quick, because I do feel like Qt Quick, what do I say about Qt Quick? I feel like Qt Quick is like very animation focused somehow, and it has a lot of facilities for those things that I just don't care about. And I think it's possible to build something that builds the kind of GUI that we like here, by combining GML and JavaScript in a different way. I'm not exactly sure how that would look like, but it would probably, yeah, we would have to explore it. I don't know. Peter Kohler says, I know a streamer who also presents his content like you do. You probably know him too. It's GeoHot. Yeah, sure. I've seen GeoHot streams a few times. I didn't necessarily enjoy them, but I can see why people do. Alex says, what don't you like about the SDL's implementation of SmartPointers? So I guess last time I looked at them, the things I didn't like were that they're not const correct, and I didn't like the object layout that shared pointer ends up with. And also I find the APIs look ugly, personally. Randomly Awesome says, do you think development on the ACK should prioritize library completeness or remaining relatively minimal, i.e. only things that are currently in use should be present? Yes, absolutely. Only things that are currently in use should be present. We do not want dead code in Serenity at all. So every now and then people come with a pull request saying, hey, look, I implemented this algorithm, and I'm adding it to one of your classes here, and they're not using it for anything. And it's very strange, because what is the point of that? Like, you're increasing everybody's build time for no reason, just so that your algorithm can exist in this code base. There's no good reason to do that. So we only add code that we want to use, and really, with very few exceptions, we only add it when we're going to use it. And that has been working really well so far. And there are probably things in the system that were once used and are not used anymore, and we keep discovering those, and we delete them as we go. Like, we don't leave things in the system that are not used, and certainly we would never leave something in the system because it might be good to have later. We just get rid of it. Peta says, have you considered doing some pair programming on the channel? Do you like pair programming? Sure, it's something I thought about. Do I like pair programming? I don't know. I guess I like it sometimes. It's really hard to tell beforehand if I'm gonna like it. If I go into pair programming because we want to achieve the same thing, then it can be really enjoyable. Yes. But I don't know that I would do it here. I would have to see. Maybe. Agaris says, did you consider using automated tools for detecting dead code and or other quality analysis? Sure. I mean, I use ClangTidy myself, and I also use the CLion built-in stuff. A lot of tools have trouble with the Serenity code base because it seems difficult for tools to understand that stuff gets called via inline assembly. So if you have, for example, in our kernel, you enter the kernel through an assembly routine that sets up the stack and everything, and then calls to C++. But static analysis tools are not smart enough to understand that the inline assembly code calls to C++, and so it thinks that everything that's only called via that assembly routine is effectively like unreachable, and this is very frustrating because a large amount of our kernel appears unreachable to tools, and then they complain about that. But I still use them. The tools, I mean. So Abhishek says, I have noticed some of stuff that modern C++ offers. For example, optional, non-null putter, etc. Is there any reason you implemented your own version? Yes, we implement our own versions of everything. That is the reason. Mr. BN100 full. Will you at some point make release point like something or other? So, no, probably not. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? There's no plan. There's no plan for anything like that. We'll just see what happens. Sergey says, why SerenityOS is for 32-bit processors? Is it makes any sense in 2021? I would refer you to the FAQ, which is at the bottom of the screen, bottom left, and you can also click here on the FAQ. And let's look for 32-bit. Why is the system 32-bit? Frequently asked question. The answer is there is a 64-bit port as well. And don't take it from the FAQ. Let me go to that port and run it. I have to turn off my current QEMU session. And look, it's running on 64-bit. People keep asking about this. There is a 64-bit port. And apparently that was not the 64-bit port? I thought it was. There is a 64-bit port anyway. I don't know why it said 686. Let's see. We'll figure that out when we rebuild it. Viraj says, what do you think of Zig? I would refer you to the FAQ right here. What do you think about programming language? I have not written 100,000 lines of Zig, so I don't really want to have an opinion about Zig. Because if you haven't spent a lot of time with the language, I don't think it's really a good thing to tell people your opinion about it. Let's see. M. Costa says, given the 32-bit version is really fast, do you perceive any performance difference between 32 and 64-bit versions? Yeah, the 32-bit version is faster. It's quite a bit faster, but okay, I think something is wrong with my build here. The 64-bit version has access to a larger address space and larger registers, so some things will be faster, but it has performance issues that we need to track down, and we don't know yet what those are, so remains to be investigated. Let's see if we can build x86-64 here. Okay. I will figure that out later. We do have a 64-bit port. Voyak says, what other programming languages have you used? Oh man, so many of them. C++, of course, PHP, Visual Basic, Plain C, C# for a while, JavaScript, obviously, and a little bit of Python here and there, a lot of Perl, Objective-C a little bit. I'm probably forgetting. Anyway. I tend to focus on C++ and JavaScript lately. Those are the languages I'm interested in. Randomly Awesome says, how do you see the existence of the terminal within the Serenity hosted workflow? Should Serenity applications possess both GUI and TUI endpoints, or focus on one or the other? I think we should focus on GUI as much as possible. At least when it comes to interactive things. I don't think having interactive terminal UI stuff is super useful. with some exceptions like top and things like that. But I would rather see us focus on GUI stuff. Agara says, if you had to write 100K lines in any language that you don't know well yet, which language would you choose? I don't know. Maybe Zig. Maybe Zig would be it. Probably Zig. And look at that. We are out of time. So we're going to have to wrap it up here. But I think it was nice to have all the questions today. Very, very good office hours. I want to thank everybody for coming. And I see that there are more questions, and we're going to have to get to those in next week. You can, of course, also leave comments on the video if you have any questions, and we can talk about them that way. But I'll be back next Friday, and we can chat again. And to you, Writer Hitchhike, no time to fix the always on top bug. I will fix it after hanging up the phone here. Don't worry. But thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate it, and appreciate all the questions, all the super chats, all the interest, and I hope that this remains interesting. I really like the format so far. Really like the interaction, and I hope you feel that it's something valuable to you as well. So, with that, I'm going to find the button that ends the stream, and I will see you all next time. Bye.